Good evening. I would like to call to order the Concord Township Board of Trustees meeting for September 18th, 2024. If you would, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, moving into a roll call. Mr. Patriarca, please.
Mrs. Lucci.
Present.
Mr. McIntosh.
Present.
Mr. Dondorfer.
Present. And moving into our approval of the minutes.
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the August 26, 2024 staff meeting minutes.
Second. All in favor?
Aye. Mr. Chair, I move to approve the September 4th, 2024 public hearing and regular trustees meeting minutes.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, and moving into our elected officials reports for the evening. Starting us off will be John Patriarca, our fiscal officer.
Thank you, Mr. Dondorfer. Hopefully everyone's enjoying the last few weeks of summer. I personally am trying to soak those up, and even though winter is coming, which also brings tax season and all kinds of fun stuff. But I'll keep my report brief this evening. I know the board has a few important topics to discuss. Tomorrow morning I'll be in my office here at Town Hall kicking off our annual audit of township finances with the state auditor. While this will be my first audit with township finances, my experience with 15 years of tax practice, we've had plenty of audits at the local, state, and federal level. So my office certainly looks forward to offering full financial transparency for the state auditors, as Concord Township always has. And obviously we extend the same transparency to all Concord residents. So looking forward to that. Also had the privilege of working with Fire Chief Sabo this past week to facilitate an additional grant from the Gary Sinise Foundation to fund an additional monitor for Concord Township, which is fantastic news. And in my opinion, just another example of the relentless pursuit of Chief Sabo and Deputy Chief Bedell. They've had that on display their entire careers here at Concord Township to really provide every possible tool to protect their staff, protect the community, and do so without burdening the residents and the taxpayers. And so I think that's fantastic. And on the topic of fire department community safety, I know the board's going to be discussing some of the community misconceptions right now regarding the fire levy this evening. I certainly look forward to offering any support in terms of financial metrics this evening. And I keep my office open to residents or any of the board or administrators that have questions in regards to the levy or any other township issues. And so residents can contact me at my office directly, 440-354-7516. And that will conclude my report this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Patriarca. And moving into the trustees report, starting off with Mrs. Lucci this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to have a shout out for Mr. Maxon for helping coordinate and promote Concord with the recent biennial statewide History Week event. He got to take some people on a tour of some of our historic sites, namely the schoolhouse. So thank you for him for doing all he does for Concord. He's so dedicated, and his knowledge about our history is wonderful. So shout out to him. I did receive a few calls, one regarding actually the power outage we had over a month ago. This resident was asking for a reliability report, with which Mr. Rose is helping generate that, so we will get that information to them for their street. I have received calls regarding the levy, and I know we will probably be touching on that a little bit more. I appreciate people calling and asking for accurate information. Last week I did attend the Trumbull County Township Association meeting on behalf of the OTA, where I met some township officials in that side of the town and talked about issues affecting their townships. A lot of same type of deals like safety services, roads, and having adequate help for their service department. I would like to thank Mr. Rose for presenting his tax classes. Appreciate your time and effort on that.
Thank you.
And I hope everyone has a great rest of their week, and that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. McIntosh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to just add to Mrs. Lucci's comments about Mr. Maxon and the dedication. I think last time we talked about how dedicated the staff at our rec department is and what they do for the township, and Dan is part of that. But his knowledge is just, he knows there's a lot of people around that we've dealt with Amy Dawson was one that knew a lot, Connie, and a lot of people. You touch those folks in this community that know the history, but Dan is a person that not only knows it, but he's dedicated to sharing it and being part of the community. So we're really grateful that he's puts the energy that he does in. It's a very impressive amount of work. I did have a few things I've been dealing with. Did have a complaint from a resident about possible commercial business operating out of a house. We seem to have that from time to time. I talked with Heather in the zoning department about it, and they're, at this point on notice and monitoring that. So we're looking at it. Did have some questions about the plantings. I know there was more activity in the Kellogg Creek restoration. That's more part of the Ohio Department of Natural Resources project to redo that. And I, as a lot of us, have fielded a lot of questions about the levy. I know I've also talked to people about property revaluation, and there seems to be a lot of property taxes, as we said, and Mr. Rose put so much effort into these tax classes this year, just 4 in the last 2 weeks, but we did it in the spring, winter,
Spring.
Been a bunch of it. He's got hours invested in this, and it's great information, but your value going up is not what is going to turn your tax. It's not going to change your tax bill by that amount. There's a lot of things that go into it. His information is available. I encourage people to ask questions and dig into that a little bit. But if you had a 30 or 40% increase in your property tax value or property value, it does not mean your taxes are going up that. It's probably going up a very small amount in comparison. Last week we had the Lake County Township Association meeting. It was some good dialogue with our membership, and we talked about a couple of important things, and that was Mrs. Lucci and I talked about also working with other counties and maybe trying to understand what other townships deal with in this Northeast Ohio region. In the last week, we did have a JED meeting, did have 2 subsequent independent meetings about development opportunities in the township. One person that was asking questions about the Quail Hollow Hotel property, another person looking at something else. So I'm also happy to report that the JED revenue is 11% ahead of last year. So it's continuing to grow as we hope it will, and we're dedicated to that. So that every little bit helps. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. McIntosh. I had a few calls since our last meeting. I did have a call regarding on an ongoing neighbor dispute that involves a zoning issue on Ravenna Road. We're working with legal and Heather in zoning to try to mitigate that issue. I did have another concern about a resident regarding some road improvements on Winchell Road that I'm working with Tim Brown on. They had some questions about the road work there, and we're working on that. I did have several calls regarding the fire levy, like we all did. So I'd like to sort of expand on that a little bit. I had some calls since the last meeting, both asking just general questions. What's the need? Why is there a need? Some for the levy, some against. And I think it's important. I know is our commitment by this board is to be transparent, provide all the facts and clarify information, because this is not our decision. Issue 2 is a very important decision. It should be a community decision, and I think our obligation and commitment is to provide our residents with the most up-to-date, factual, and credible information so that they can make an educated decision on the future of the community as far as safety services. So with that, we had a lot of correspondence, some of in the means of phone calls. We did receive a letter that I would like to read into the record. It was anonymous, but I think it's important to address, so I'm going to read that. Dear trustees, I am writing looking for clarifications, answers, and transparency on various topics, hoping these will be addressed in the Concord Township Monthly Grapevine or News Herald newspaper prior to the election. Topic: trustees vote to place fire levy on November 5 ballot. At the recommendation of a Citizens Advisory Committee, it appears that these committee members, interested citizens, were selected by trustees and Administrator Andy Rose, who were picked by those in favor of passing this levy. Not at all transparent. This not the way to get a fresh perspective from the citizens when they are handpicked by those supporting the levy. Funny, isn't that the cost of the levy was never stated in dollar amounts per 100,000 home values past levies had? transparency not here. Then, hidden within the fire levy is the police manning structure that the citizens voted overwhelmingly to defeat at the last election. According to Carl Dondorfer, the township has been funding for 6 deputies but now needs 10. What part of the need has increased by 40%? Has the township calls increased by 40%, or is it because of 40% more land? Let's not give percentages. Let's be total transparency and numbers justifying these percentages. 4 out of 10 equals 40%, so does 4,000 out of 10,000 equal 40%. So what are the numbers? Excuse me. Has the numbers of citations and or crimes increased? Numbers. Have the citations, arrests increased by 40%? Numbers. Where do the monies collected go? To the township? If so, how much? And which fund does it go to? If not, where does it go and why? Show us the numbers. Then in another press release in the News Herald, I read where Residential Incentive District was passed, RIDS. In the article, Andy Rose states the estimate shows that the Residential Incentive District could raise around $4 million over 10 years. Then, what's the need for a fire police levy? Further on, it is said that additional state money through the county's new local government funding formula would be coming to the township. Then it is mentioned by Morgan McIntosh that Ivy Ridge RID and another RID for villas at Canawood is being considered by the township. More monies, more numbers. We need transparency, not levies. Whatever happened to floating a bond, show us the numbers. No doubt that should this so-called needed levy pass, along with the outrageous property tax increases, will no doubt see fixed income seniors forced to leave and lose their homes in Concord Township. Soon, us seniors are soon to become the majority voters, and then we will see who works for whom. Those that address citizens' issues versus costs, and are those who put the so-called township over senior citizens. Without seniors, you have no township. We will be looking for numbers in October so we can vote knowing the numbers and the real need, if any. So I wanted to get that on the record. I thank whoever authored the letter, and we appreciate your input. I just would like to clarify some of that information. First off, coming into this, we knew from the failure of the joint safety levy that, we were looking at a $2.3 million deficit if we were to have adequate staffing in fire, as well as a contract with the sheriff for 10 deputies, which would fund 2 deputies 24/7, 365 days a year in Concord Township. Now, in this letter, it references that, when we looked for outside input and a different perspective, that we had some involvement or chose the Citizens Action Committee, and that's just not accurate. We had several people that came forward after the initial loss, concerned citizens, residents of the community asked to be more involved, and it was suggested that we, somehow look outside the box and get a different perspective. A Citizens Action Committee was an idea, and Mr. Rose rolled with that. And can you clarify, how that committee was actually formed?
I can. Thank you, Mr. Dondorfer. Good evening. The Citizens Advisory Committee came about through discussions that the trustees had on the record, I believe going all the way back to February. Second meeting in February, I believe. And there were some residents that had reached out to the trustees and myself, the township, and said, hey, we're very disappointed that, I'm paraphrasing, but the message was, we're disappointed that the levy failed last November, and we're concerned about police and fire protection, and what can we do to help? And so there were 4 different individuals that had reached out to either myself or one of the trustees. And so we started the group with those 4, and then I looked at people with different backgrounds that have expressed interest in helping the township in the past. Some of them are current or former BZA zoning commission members, and so we brought them in, and we asked them. Mr. Patriarca and I met with them over a series of meetings, and that's how they were selected.
Okay.
And there were 2 folks that I had asked that said, I appreciate it, but, you know, whether it was, you know, I don't have an interest in getting into this type of volunteerism, or they didn't have the bandwidth, they were very busy. But, you know, so we ended up with some very good members, and then, you know, over the course of time, we had numerous meetings, and then the chair, I guess, Mr. Paganini, he actually came and addressed the trustees at the second meeting in June and talked about their work and their findings, and then the report was issued to me, which I then reviewed, and Mr. Patriarca reviewed, and then we endorsed that to you guys, and that report's on the website.
Right.
Along with all their names, and
it wasn't an issue of, I mean, we knew what the deficit was going to be. We knew what kind of money we needed. We were just looking at the appropriate vehicle to get there and what recommendation would fit the needs of this community best. And we were, in the interest of time, I don't think we had the opportunity to really go out and advertise or ask for applications. It would just be, time wouldn't allow for that. So we asked you to vet some citizens that showed an interest, and we really weren't involved outside of your forming of that committee.
correct.
Sure, and just a couple points to add, if you don't mind, Mr. Dondorfer. I think first the inference from that letter that everyone on the committee was handpicked to support the levy. I'm not sure that that's accurate.
It's not accurate.
Not everyone was on the same page that entire process. There were talks all over the spectrum. There were ideas, you know, everyone was on board to help the community and get to where we needed to be. But to say that, hey, you know, the board handpicked X amount of people, they knew exactly what, you know, they were going to get from those people, I find that to be inaccurate. And I think that committee worked really diligently. I think they worked hard to come up with a solution.
Right.
So that's the first point. And then the second point of identifying the deficit, there's kind of 2 pieces to that. So yes, we generically knew what the deficit was going to be based on the current staffing levels in this current year. Obviously, we reduced from 9 to 6 sheriffs. But the deficit, the deficit that we were working on, first we had to identify what we thought would be an appropriate level of safety services within the community that would be sufficient for the residents. And then once we established that, which did go to that 10 sheriffs and sufficient funding for the fire department, including staffing and apparatus, which again had not seen an increase in what will be 9 years come January. Based on that, we were able to find that deficit, and based on, you know, that need, we were looking at approximately $2.58 million deficit on the operational budget for the safety services.
Okay.
So I think those 2 points are worth mentioning.
Right. No, definitely. And, you know, the author also indicated, you know, that I had mentioned that the township had been funding for 6 deputies, but now needs 10. And I know we discussed this on the record, and I've mentioned it in the past, but I think it's worth going over again and clarifying. That's just not accurate. What happened was, prior to 2008, you know, I was at the sheriff's department, then I was in charge of patrol, and it wasn't uncommon for us to have 7 deputies on a shift, which included supervisors. And the way it broke down was there was always a boy 1 and boy 2 car. Well, the boy zone was Concord Township. So you always had 2 zone cars on a shift. We were running 8-hour shifts then. And you would have a supervisor on the west end covering Painesville Township and Concord, backing up the guys. And you'd have a supervisor on the east end in Leroy and Perry Townships. After the financial climate changed in 2008, the Board of Commissioners then decided that they, based on the legal requirement of the sheriff to provide emergency response to the townships, they withdrew the patrol division budget line item and only gave the sheriff a certain amount for emergency response, which was, you know, priority 1 calls. You know, crimes in progress, domestic violence, robberies, burglaries, injury accidents, damage accidents, anything that was in progress that you needed an immediate response. Outside of that, they went to the townships and told them that if you wanted patrol deputies, which is not reactive, patrol officers. It's proactive, going out, insertion into your residential developments, running traffic enforcement based on speeding complaints, detecting crime before it happens, and things of that nature. You would have to contract with the sheriff and provide for your own patrol deputies. So when the townships entered that contract initially in Concord Township in 2008, we started with 5 deputies. The goal and recommendation of the sheriff and myself at that point in time was that Painesville Township and Concord Township both needed to get to funding 10 deputies per township, because it takes 5 full-time deputies to run 1 patrol deputy 24/7, 365 days a year. So if we had funded 10 deputies, it would allow for 2 full-time patrol officers within Painesville Township and Concord Township 24/7. So we had tried working that over the years. We started with 5, we went to 6 over the next several years. After the permanent safety levy was passed, we worked past that, we got up to 9, and the goal was always to get to 10, but unfortunately with the failure of the safety levy in the fall, we moved from 9, we lost 3 and went down to 6. But the goal has always been to get back to 10. In my professional opinion, I mean, you can't patrol a township of nearly 20,000 residents with 1 deputy sheriff. It's reactive. It's a reactive law enforcement response. We generate over 40,000 calls for service at the sheriff's department. It's continued to grow annually, and there's no time for anything else other than going to calls and going into emergencies. And it's not even safe for not only the community, but the officer that's on duty, because he's alone and you wait longer for backup.
When you talk about the numbers, when you're going through the different levels of patrol the Concord's had, you go back to the pre-2008, before the commissioners made the change and how the township started funding. The Concord has had more growth since then. We've got businesses
Certainly.
that have come. The corridors were not what it was 15 years ago.
Yep.
And I know that the conversation's been, and I was looking at some statistics I have here, and in 2019, the total of Part 1 and 2 crimes was 653, and in 2022, it was 743. So it's 100 more. In 2021, it spiked to 870. So, we've talked about this before. I know I've gone to Carl, both you and I've also gone to the commissioners several times, talked with them about the increase, across the townships. After COVID, we were seeing 30 and 40% increases in crime. And, since COVID year, that was really high. It's come down a bit, but it's still 100 more Part 1 and 2 crimes from 2019. Persistently over 3 years. So we are seeing the numbers are there, and we have it. And
They are there.
And I know that when the monthly sheriff's report, when we were first 3 of us together, 19 or in 20, we were getting 800-900 calls a month. And the last year or two, it's been over 1,000 events a month.
Right.
So we're seeing it out there.
Yeah, and those statistics are on the sheriff's office webpage.
Yes.
I know the author asked, where's the data? I mean, if you go to the road patrol and you click on the link on the left-hand side and hit the township statistics, it will show you the statistics for the last several years. Your Part 1 crimes are your most serious crimes and felonies. Your Part 2s are your lesser offenses and misdemeanors. Part 3 are miscellaneous calls for service. It breaks down there the stats over the last several years, and we have seen an increase in crime. And I'm still in the business, and I haven't seen it like it is now. And the other issue that really touches home here is, somebody mentioned, well, where does the money go? Where the citations that are generated? I mean, are there more citations? Well, yeah, there are, but the citation money that gets generated, that money goes to the engineer's office. Township doesn't see any of it. It goes to the engineer's office. It always has for road improvements, and that's by state statute. What I will tell you is, in my professional opinion, unfortunately, when the commissioners this past year negotiated the sheriff's contract, it resulted in an 18% increase for staffing over the next 3 years. That's a pass-through cost to the township. We're going from 120 $20,000, $130,000 a year right now, up to over in 3 years, nearly $160,000 per deputy. The pure fact of the matter is, so you can make an educated decision, is if we pass the fire levy, it will free up and allow us to allocate monies from the permanent levy to fund the sheriff's office staffing that is needed in Concord Township, which is 10 deputies, which translates to 2 deputies in Concord 24/7, 365 days a year. That's basic needs of what we need for a community this size. Other communities that are about this size, they're running 4 to 5 officers on a shift. 2 officers, we've done it. I've done it here in Concord. Well, I said we had a boy 1 and boy 2 car. You always had a supervisor that was available. But if it doesn't pass, we're looking at a situation that Leroy and Perry's confronted with, which is, I don't believe that the sheriff will contract with us for less than 6 deputies. So what that results in is there will be no proactive patrol in the township. It will be reactive and emergency based only. So what does that translate to? If there's an emergency call, a domestic in progress, some crime in progress, an injury accident, yes, the sheriff is obligated by the Ohio Revised Code to respond to the emergency. But if there's a situation where you come home and you find out later somebody went through your car or stole your identity, used your credit cards, you're going to have to self-report. I implemented that plan at the sheriff's department when we went through this setback in the patrol division. And what you would have to do is go into the sheriff's department, fill out your own police report. They would submit it to the supervisor, and he'd decide whether or not it would need follow-up, and that takes a lot of time. So I don't think it's a level of service that I would expect in the township. But again, this is a community decision. We want you to be armed with the best information and the factual information so that you can make an educated decision.
You mentioned other communities, and I think it's interesting. I've talked to some of the mayors on the West End, and you've got communities that have a fraction of our population and what's Willowick? Like 2-3 square miles, 7,000-8,000 people. How many police officers do they have on? 2 to 3.
And a supervisor on shift.
And we're 24 square miles, just under, and we're almost 20,000 people. And on a good day, we've got 2.
Right. And I know the letter also indicated that we didn't disclose or the cost of the levy is stated in dollar amounts per 100,000, but we actually did. We made that notation on the record in a special meeting on July 24th. And it's also was posted in the August 2024 Grapevine, where it states the levy on the ballot for November 5th, 2024 is a responsible 3.9 mil levy, which is $137 per 100,000 taxable property value. And my understanding is, Mr. Patriarcha, if you can confirm, is that is on the property value assessment based on the current value of the home, not the new revaluation that is coming out in 25. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Dondorfer. And so it's certainly a question I've had to field many times in the past few weeks. A great question, though, actually, and I was happy to answer it, that the millage on this levy, the 3.9 mils, was to be applied to current values. And so when obviously everyone's getting the notices from Auditor Galloway's office about the increase in value, that increased value will not be applicable to this levy. And so what ends up happening, for anyone that attended or watched Administrator Rose's tax class, that effective millage of 3.9 brings in a fixed dollar amount. And that dollar amount, if collected at 100%, which we can't account for, would be approximately $3.28 million. That number stays fixed regardless of what the increase in property value is for residents in this upcoming year.
Great, thank you.
He could teach my tax class.
There
Yeah.
you go. Like, I learned from the best.
Well, I appreciate you clarifying some of the misinformation, or some people maybe just don't see the meetings, or they don't read the grapevine, or they don't see the press releases that go out. I wanted to touch base on his question regarding the residential incentive district and money that would come in from that. It's still money that is not going to be available in the next year.
Correct.
So we can't, and also we can't use that money for,
Right.
we can only use it for fire station infrastructure, like building station 2, for parks, apparatus, and
Town hall.
anything to make town hall a little bit bigger, a little bit better. Those are issues as well. So we can't use that money. He also asked about the LGF, which Mr. McIntosh, I'm sure you can comment on since you talked about.
Yeah, I think, again, state code, and we talked about this in our public hearings for the RIDS, infrastructure spending, it can't fund operations. 3/4 of our safety budget goes to pay for either the sheriff's contract or staffing of fire department. So 75% of it is operational costs, and we need a levy for that. We said back in February we were going to need a levy, and I think the person who wrote this letter said, isn't it interesting we picked people that were in favor of a levy? There's no scenario in which you fund a budget that's short of $2 million and don't have to do a levy. If somebody was on that committee and had said they thought we could get by with, they either have a PhD in finance and understand things that I don't, or there's no way you could make that work. We've been saying it since the levy failed, that we had to have money. It was a matter of what and how we structured that. With respect to the local government fund, yes, Concord will get some much deserved money, but we had to cut a deal with the rest of the communities and work on it. So it's money that comes over time. We'll see something. The RID will incrementally, as Mr. Rose has brought up, is as houses are built in those districts, we will slowly. So while if you take a look at what each one will produce and multiply it over a period of 10 years, it's going to be small numbers, and then it's going to kind of bubble, and then it's going to taper back down. It isn't going to be a steady flow of dollars. It's going to be very inconsistent. That doesn't go for paying for salaries anyway. The local government fund, yes, we're going to get a little bit more money, but again, it doesn't support the budget next year. We're going to get a modest amount more, and it doesn't fill the over $2 million shortfall. We're going to get a couple $100,000 more. Now, in 5 years' time, if the state continues to maintain the local government funding, there's a lot of legislatures running around talking about cutting the income tax, and we know that the state's had financial difficulties in the past, and they've made cuts. The local government cut to Concord was cut 30 or 40% at some point like 10 years ago. So there's no guarantee that local government, we have a formula that's favored to us, but if they cut the money that goes into it, we get a favorable amount of what the county gets, but it's not a guarantee that we're going to have this money. Now, 6, 7, 8 years from now, if the local government funding does what it does, well, maybe things will be different. I wouldn't want to count on that. I don't think it's responsible for us to tell the residents that we're going to be fine and not plan for. The future will be the future, and we'll have to deal with that when that time comes. But Mrs. Lucci, you've said it before, we are constantly asked to spend money on roads. We never get enough roads done in a year. Like, there's always things that the township general budget. So these things that are coming to us, the small increase we'll get out of revaluation, the incremental increase of local government fund, we are not short on expenses of other things besides safety. Parks, roads, town hall, it never ends.
And I think it would be awful if we felt that 6 deputies is enough to take care of our community. We have over almost 20,000 people. Yes, we know we have seniors, and that's not the majority yet, but it would be irresponsible for us to think that safety is not a priority.
Right. And we've said it before too. I mean, we're not unempathetic to everybody in our community. We understand, but we have to take the big view of what's in the best interest of our community. And I think safety and adequate 911 response. We've already started to have the conversation about the what if scenario this levy doesn't pass. And I've had direct conversations with the chief and deputy chief, and we went round and around, and I said, Chief, how do we tell people simply what the impact of this is? We know that the county isn't favorable to contracting if we don't come with at least 6 deputies, safety officers. I understand all that, and I agree with it. It makes sense. Chief's been telling us 30 to 40. In July, we had a 50% overlapping call in the fire department. Chief told me it's not the first call for 911 that's the problem, it's the second.
Right.
30 to 40% of the time, we will fail to respond adequately to 911, and we're looking at no police if this levy doesn't pass.
And that is very scary.
Scary. Very
And,
scary.
and I don't believe we're trying to be alarmist. I don't believe we're trying to use scare tactics, as some have stated in the past. We're just trying to present you with the actual facts and the realities of what will happen. I mean, and the other big component of this is, you know, both fire and police are dealing with a national dilemma of recruitment and retention of staffing. And people that are in the business of laying off first responders, you're not getting them
coming
back.
back.
They're not coming back. And we will have to learn how to function at a different level with just emergency response for certain things, and our services will suffer, and that bothers me because, you know, and we have a lot of the residency in Concord Township is you know, there's a lot of senior citizens. I respect them. You know, we don't like taxing people, but they have needs too, just as
Right.
everybody else. And you know, the fire department and law enforcement respond on a lot of different calls. And I will tell you, when I was at the sheriff's department, every year Cleveland Magazine rated the best communities in the suburbs. And I would get a call every year, and they want my stats on, you know, the townships. And I asked the guy, you know, you do whoever was the author did the article every year for Cleveland Magazine, and I said, you know, you're always looking at law enforcement and the schools. He says, well, you know, really safety services in the schools are probably two of the most important communities. That show, you know, the health and wellness of a community. And if you have strong safety and strong schools, you usually have a healthy community. But if you don't have strong safety and your schools are suffering, usually it's going to lead to bigger and worse problems. You know.
Businesses won't want to come here.
Right. So
Our insurance premiums
They're
go
going to go
up.
up.
So we're just trying to provide accurate information. That's why I thought it would read that letter into the record and provide you with the facts and where we're at. And Mr. Rose.
Yeah, just one last point, because the author of the letter also talks about whatever happened to floating a bond. We don't have the ability, floating a bond is borrowing money. We don't have the ability to do that. We're not the federal government. If we did obtain a bond, it would be for a major infrastructure project. We have a bond that financed Station 1. When it comes time to do Station 2,
We'd have to borrow against collateral of some kind.
That is correct.
We'd have to make build a bridge
but
or something.
you cannot take out a bond or float a bond
for operations.
and have cash to fund operations. It's not fiscally sound, and it's against the law. So it's either way. I just wanted to point that
Thanks.
out. Real quick.
So I would urge our residents or anybody else in the community, if we didn't answer your questions, or if you have additional questions, please reach out to any of us. We're very, available and willing to discuss.
Yeah, sure. If I could just add
Yeah,
one more
John.
thing, just in the just for a little bit of transparency, and I know the question has come up from residents about the increase in revenue from the new tax valuations, and so we will not have a concrete final figure on that until right now. Residents have the opportunity to challenge their current values with the auditor. Once the auditor responds to those are resolved, sent back down to the state finalizes everything. At that point, we will have a final number of what that's going to look like from an increase in revenue. That being said, we do have a ballpark figure we anticipate somewhere in the neighborhood, and again, these are, I don't want to say guesstimates, but to some degree, we are having to make estimates as far as planning goes, somewhere in the neighborhood of 600 to 650,000. Keep in mind, currently, only 45% of those monies that are coming in will be allocated to the general fund, 55% going to the road and bridge fund. So call it 300,000 max.
Great. Thank you.
As far as that new money comes in, just in the spirit of transparency,
Yeah,
because that was a
appreciate
question:
that.
how much is coming in, and where is it going? And hopefully that can clear up any questions on that new revenue.
Thank you very much. Anything else? No. Okay, moving on into departmental reports for the evening. Mr. Rose, our administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Dondorfer, members of the board, Mr. Patriarca. Welcome, Mr. Dines. Good to have you here this evening.
Yeah, great to see you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good to be here.
Thank you for joining us. As usual, I'll start with items that are on the agenda. Items B and C are board reappointments, one for the Zoning Commission and one for the Board of Zoning Appeals. And the only other item I'd like to touch on is item E. That is a fee adjustment related to cemetery fees that's tied to the new columbariums. So I encourage reappointment and passage of those items. Moving on to other items, yesterday, very good news. We had the pre-construction meeting for the waterline extension project for Auburn and Girdle Roads. The schedule's being finalized and tweaked, but residents should start seeing the orange signs going up here probably the end of next week. And shovels should be in the ground no later than October 9th. Estimated completion is Thanksgiving, so we're very excited about that. They will come back in the spring to do the grass seeding and the landscape restoration along the sides of the road. It'll be too late in the year to do the final restoration until the spring, but we're very encouraged by that, and that was a very good meeting. Speaking of fall, we're sneaking up on October pretty quick, so I would ask the trustees if there are no objections. I would like to set the trick-or-treating hours for Halloween 2024. I'm recommending 6 to 8 p.m. on October 31st. We've already had some calls and inquiries, which is why I'm bringing it up now. And the local paper was getting ready to do a story, and the reporter has already asked us for our hours. So if there are no objections, we'll do it on Halloween, October 31st, from 6 to 8 p.m. Moving on, I've completed the latest round of Understanding Your Taxes class. One of the sessions was videotaped. It's on our website. It's on our YouTube page. I believe it's linked on Facebook as well. I encourage all residents just to take some time to watch the video if you haven't seen it or attended the class to better understand how your taxes work. I do want to drive one point home, because one of the most common phone calls that we get is, levy related, and they say, my taxes are going to go up 34%. My taxes are going to go up 42%. So, Brian, could you put that one slide? So, this is one of the slides from my class, and this is under the myth busting section of my class towards the end. And when it comes to the sexennial reevaluation, we've heard, my home value is increased by 30%. Well, my taxes increased by 30%. The answer is no, because House Bill 920 provides a credit to prevent this from happening. The average increase in taxes for someone who has a 30% increase in value will be about 4.5% to 5%, because the increase is tagged to the inside millage only. And then the red font is my own personal example. This is my house. I got my paperwork from our lovely auditor, and my house value went up 47%. And so I ran the numbers on the inside millage, and my tax increase, I estimated at 7.3%, or $289.69 a year. It will likely be a little bit less because of House Bill 920, it will force a lower effective millage rate on all of the outside levies. So I think it may come in a little bit under 7.3%. But I just wanted to share that with you, that whatever your increase is, that does not mean that is how much your tax bill is going to increase. Great. And if anybody has any questions about that, please feel free to call me. I love talking about this stuff, as crazy as that sounds.
It's great.
And then finally, the next Coffee with the Administrator is scheduled for a week from Thursday, the 26th. That'll be at 9 a.m. and that will also take place at our community center. I believe, Mr. Dondorfer, you said you might be joining us?
I may be joining.
All right, that's exciting. So that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. Okay, moving into our audience portion, seeing that we have nobody with us this evening. We have no old business, so we will move into new business for the evening with a few votes.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the August financial report.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye. Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the reappointment of Ron Terriaco to the zoning commission, alternate member for a term effective October 5th, 2024 through October 4th, 2026.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, I move to reappoint Theodore R. Hack Jr. to the Board of Zoning Appeals alternate member for a term effective October 5th, 2024 through October 4th, 2026.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the promotion of firefighter EMT basic Cody Benlock to the position of firefighter 1 effective 9/16/2024.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And just to clarify, that's a part-time firefighter. not a
Okay.
full-time firefighter. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve cemetery department adjustment fee for the date of death, year at the time of need to $100 for 2024 columbarium inscription.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, and Mr. Patriarca with our future meetings and announcements.
September 30th at 3 p.m., we will have a staff meeting at Town Hall. October 1st at 7 p.m., Zoning Commission will meet here at Town Hall. And October 2nd at 4 p.m., a new time, we will have trustee office hours here at the conference room, immediately followed by our trustee meeting at 5 p.m. here at Town Hall. Those are new times for our monthly meeting, which we discussed and voted on in a prior meeting. But I did want to reiterate, office hours 4 p.m., trustee meeting at 5 p.m.
Thanks, John. And that concludes our Township Trustee meeting this evening. Good evening, Concord Township, and thanks for joining us. Have a good night.